Good evening. So, I got another question in my comments. Good one, too. Very good question. And that is, you know, I assume it's directed towards me personally as well as addicts in general. And the question was, how do you know when you're done with the drugs and alcohol? Wow. You would think this should be an easy, quick answer. And while I can't answer for every person who suffers from substance abuse addiction, there are some general things and some guidelines that, at least in all the experience I've had and all of the other people who suffer from this affliction, have told me in conversation. I will cover some of those general guidelines or base rules, I guess. For me personally, there was no distinct definitive guideline or event. It's something that has just happened naturally over time, through my journey of recovery. There are a lot of indicators that that is happening. You stop having the dreams, you stop having the cravings, you stop thinking about whatever your substance of choice was when you have a bad day, for example, or a good day, or any kind of overwhelming emotion that you feel you need to cope. Those are very good indicators. Myself in my journey right now, I'm to the point where it doesn't even cross my mind. Um, on a rare occasion, somebody might mention something, and I might think that's who I used to be, but it never crosses my mind that this is something I'm ever going to choose again. Actually, at this point in my journey, if I even think about possibly picking up a drug or an alcohol, it not only scares me, but it disgusts me as well. Um, and I literally like to put myself in that mindset. I have to forcefully think about it. Like I have to make a conscious effort to be like, okay, what if? Because it just doesn't even. It's not even part of my equation anymore. That being said, substance abuse addiction, and this probably pertains to a lot of other forms of addiction as well, including certain types of codependency and whatnot. The drugs and alcohol usually aren't the problem. Yes, certain substances do have a particular physical dependency aspect to them, but that portion of the recovery usually is over with relatively quickly. In my case, heroin, for the most part, 5 days or so, and the body's gone through the withdrawal and it's in the process of healing. The rest of it's all psychosomatic, literally habitual, meaning because I spent so many years as an addict and this was a go to coping mechanism to numb myself and escape my reality and all these other things, multiple layers of wounds, we'll say, traumas, whatever, um, hurts. Those pathways in the brain are still there. Um, and it takes a lot of intention and a lot of effort to start to retrain the brain to have its automatic response a different coping mechanism or a different tool. Um, and in some cases, and in mine, I'm healing enough deeper stuff that there's not much that rocks my boat anymore. I have truly reached a very calm, serene state, and I am content with where my life is. Yes, I'm happy with where my life is. Um, Fulfilled. Are there things and situations I want to change in my life? Is there more I want? Yes, of course there is. Called ambition, desire. Am I bored or unfulfilled living in sobriety? No, not at all. Um, so, if the drugs and alcohol are a symptom of an underlying problem, just stopping the drugs and alcohol isn't going to solve the problem. Yes, it's a very good step, absolutely, and I advocate it 120,000%. Matter of fact, there are some purists out there who advocate complete abstinence of any mood or mind altering substance, including caffeine, nicotine, even sugar. Um, and I can see the merit in that. Uh, I don't think going to that extreme is necessary. I think anything in excess is abusive, including abstinence, to an extent. I'm not by any means advocating anyone go out there and try to be a recreational heroin addict or whatever. No, it doesn't work. I've tried it. Trust me, it doesn't work. There's no such thing. So anyway, the drugs and alcohol are a symptom of an underlying issue. So you stop the drugs and alcohol, and you start to get some clarity of thought. The brain fog starts to clear, as we say, and that's a great first step. Once you get some clarity of thought and whatnot, it's very typical. You're going to have dreams. You're going to have cravings. You're going to have urges. You know, depending upon how long you were in active addiction, you're not going to deprogram 20 years of rewiring your brain in 6 months or a year or even 2 years. Hell, maybe not even 5. Just doesn't work that way. You will definitely make progress, but, and this is why they call addiction a terminal disease. Part of the reason why they call it a terminal disease is because usually once all of that is set and a person spends half of their life in and out of active addiction, are you really going to live long enough to completely deprogram all of the residual? Maybe, maybe not. There's other reasons why people call it a terminal disease. We'll get into that some other time. So, um, back to the question: when do you know you're done with drugs and alcohol? It's for me personally, it's kind of hard to answer because it's one of those things you just know. You know, there's no doubts, there's no reservations, there's no what if, or well, someday I can drink again. Mm-mm. There's a reason we say one day at a time. Okay, in early addiction recovery, in early recovery, a lot of alcoholics and addicts, they can't think about it in terms of the rest of their life. It's too much. It's terrifying. What do you mean I can't ever drink again for the rest of my life? What do you mean I can't ever smoke a joint again for the rest of my life? Like, you know, and that's why we say take it one day at a time. Don't worry about the rest of your life. worry about today. And before you know it, a year's gone by, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Um, so obviously, quitting the drugs and alcohol is a big step. After that, it's not only identifying but doing some serious work on healing whatever's going on internally that you feel you need to keep going to an external solution. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who, under certain definitions, would suffer from addiction as well as codependency issues. Um, Suffer is kind of a strong word. Actually, if anything, we would probably say she was a functioning addict. Now, her drug of choice is not one of the big hard three, um, but it's still used as a coping mechanism, as an escape. In her particular case, um, the reasoning and justification was, it allows her to lose her inhibitions to connect and express herself on an emotional level, liquid courage. And there are certain people out there who can do that and function quite well. Then there are other people like me who can't do that. Um, Once I start, I don't want to stop. Not entirely true. Obviously, I did want to stop at some point because here I am almost 2 years sober. That's another good indicator of when you're done with drugs and alcohol. When you're just so tired of, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. Um, it's a conscious choice. But to answer the question a little more succinctly, you have to truly understand why you keep choosing the drugs and alcohol. Because if it's at a level that you feel you're an alcoholic or an addict, there's an underlying issue. Usually some kind of emotional issue, um, possibly even mental instability, spiritual issue. Once you start being truly happy with who you are and feeling fulfilled in your life and your circumstances, because you get that fulfillment from within and from your higher power, because you no longer need to be validated by outside people or things. In my experience and others I've talked to, you will just naturally stop wanting or even thinking about the drugs and alcohol because you're healing whatever was hurt inside that caused you to go to the first place. And it's tough. It's a very tough journey. It's a very trying journey. Um, Healing hurts. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. It's a lot of sitting with the pain, sitting with the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, fighting with one's pride, fighting with one's ego. I suffered from a self-forgiveness problem for many, many years. I had a hard time forgiving myself for the things I had done and the way I treated people. And I still do to some extent. There are some things that have happened in my life I still have yet to completely forgive myself for. I've reached a point where I've accepted what has happened and I've forgiven myself for not knowing any better. But have I truly forgiven myself for the choices I made? Not all of them, no. So I'm still a work in progress. And that's what they mean by progress, not perfection. Um, a friend who relapsed a few months back, um, he had over a year sobriety, and I was thoroughly convinced he was done with all of that. And then some things happened, and there were some behavior patterns that came up, some big red flags, and I was very concerned, rightly so. He didn't, he didn't, he didn't relapse. Um, he finally admitted to me at one point that he had had reservations the whole time. The whole time in the back of his head, he had this thought that, when he got done with probation or whatever, his legal consequences were that he could go and smoke pot and drink occasionally again. That lasted about 2 months. He's out doing crack again now. And I haven't talked to him in almost 2 months. I don't even know if he's alive or dead. And it hurts. And it's sad. But I know there's nothing I can do. As an ex-addict, I know full well when I got to that point and I made that decision, there wasn't anything anyone could say or do that was going to make me change my mind. The other tricky part about substance abuse is when a person starts abusing a substance, whether it be alcohol or drugs, emotionally you stop growing. So if you started, became a heavy drinker or an alcoholic at the age of 18 and you're now in your 30s or 40s getting sober, guess what? Emotionally, you're 18 years old and you got a lot of catching up to do real fast because all of those emotions and everything that you were numbing yourself from and you were escaping and running from for all of those years, essentially repressing, well, guess what? They're all going to hit you like a broken dam, and you're going to have a flood of repressed shit to deal with. Anger, resentment, all kinds of stuff. And that's why I talk so much about not just accountability, but ownership. To truly empower oneself and to heal that stuff, you got to take ownership of it. Stop blaming everyone and everything else. Be brutally honest about the part you played and own it. That's how you're going to heal it. And once you do that healing, like I said, in my experience and a lot of people I've talked to, no longer looking to an outside substance will just naturally happen. It's just part of the progression. I've talked about this TED Talk I watched years ago. And this guy, I think it was his brother who suffered from addiction. So this guy went down a rabbit hole studying everything he could. And what he discovered was that most of the addiction model and recovery community was entirely based on a particular set of lab rat studies that were done. I don't remember when now, 50s, 60s, 70s, who knows, where lab rats were given different substances in their water: regular water, cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, heroin, morphine. Um, it was a study to partially to try to understand addiction, but it was also partially to classify how addictive certain substances were. Um, the results were pretty much as expected. The rats would become addicted to a particular substance, and they would just go back to it to the point of death. They would literally kill themselves drinking this cocaine-laced water or heroin-laced water or whatever it was. Years later, another group of people did the same study and recreated it, got similar results, and they said, okay, well, let's change something. And so they gave the lab rats what they would consider rat heaven. Big, beautiful cage, running wheels, tunnels to play with, just all kinds, anything and everything that a particular that these rodents could possibly want. Great bedding, great food, all this other stuff. And lo and behold, the rate of addiction in the lab rats drastically dropped by like 80 or 90%. They just stopped choosing the drugs. And what they figured out was essentially because the rats had everything that they needed to have a fulfilled life provided for them, they no longer needed to escape the bland, empty cage that they were in. The same thing with people. The only difference is you have control over what cage you put yourself in, or whether it's even a cage to begin with. Now, a lot of people will argue that point and be like, oh, well, I don't have control over how somebody acts towards me or what somebody does. Or, no, I don't have control over whether or not the guy in front of me sits at the green light. What I do have control over is whether or not I'm going to allow it to ruin my day. I have control over me and my emotional state, as well as my mental state and my spiritual state. And because of that, I make and create my reality. Sure, there is the actual physical reality that we all live and interact with, of course. But how I see the world, how I perceive things, and how I allow things to affect me or not affect me is entirely up to me. I get to choose what my rat heaven looks like. And so because of that, because I have made choices to make my cage a lot more fulfilling, actually because I'm not even in a cage anymore and I'm just in a fulfilled life, um, a more fulfilling life. I don't think anyone's ever completely fulfilled. You would have no desire left. Anyway, um, because of that, I just no longer have a desire to escape the reality I've created, the life I've created. So to answer the question, when do you know you're done with the drugs and alcohol? You just know because you no longer need to escape your life or yourself for that matter. The good indicators are you're no longer going to have dreams about it. You're not going to have any more cravings or urges. Little things that used to set you off and want to go get high won't bother you anymore. You can look at yourself in the mirror and hold your own gaze for more than 30 seconds. You can sit in silence for 30 seconds and not want to distract yourself with your phone or whatever. Perfectly still, at ease, comfortable in your own skin. Those are all very good indicators that you're well on your way to being done with the drugs and alcohol. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you. It was a wonderful question. More, please. So have a blessed night. Oh, and well, the lunar eclipse was yesterday, but I hope everyone survived that. I did.